Welcome and thank you for joining us today for our May monthly buzz, which is all about digital health and what's next in this space. I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors and partner for the event today, MTP Connect, who are Australia's growth centre for medical technologies, biotechnologies and the pharmaceutical sector. Before we begin, in the spirit of reconciliation, Cicada Innovations acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. For those of you who don't know us, Cicada Innovations is Australia's pioneer deep tech incubator supporting startups and scale-ups solving the world's most pressing problems. Throughout our history, we have helped more than 300 companies raise about $350 million in capital and grants to launch 700 deep technology companies globally. For us, we're always looking forward to what's next in deep tech so that we're always aiming to solve the problems of now, but also those of the future. We're really excited to be able to continue to provide support to the ecosystem by bringing our monthly buzz event to you virtually. So as you know, digital advancements have been made across the spectrum around the globe, and these innovations have allowed us to explore opportunities unrestricted by geographical and physical barriers. And as much of the world remains in lockdown today, digital health is playing a huge part in how we manage health and the well-being of our population, both now and as we move forward. So it's a really exciting space to be working in. And although digital health is medtech, it has its own unique risks and regulations to navigate. And today we have a stellar panel, each leading in critical junctures of the commercialization pathway of digital health, right from research to regulation. So I'm going to go through who they are and I'll ask them to give a little wave. So we've got Elizabeth McGrath, Research Fellow at the University of Canberra and previously Director at the TGA. We've got Jill Frame, Deputy Research Director at the Australian eHealth Research Centre, Bronwyn Legrice, Founder and CEO at Ant Health, and Zoran Bolovic, Chief Executive and Chief Information Officer at eHealth New South Wales. And these experts have generously donated their time and agreed to participate in a 1-hour chat about the impacts of digital health on our society and also about how Australia can position itself as a leader. They're also here to answer your questions in this space. So I'm going to give you a little bit of housekeeping on how we do that. The first thing is the format. It's an hour and we'll have about 20 minutes of questions from me, and then we'll open up the virtual floor for about 25 minutes, and then we'll have a wrap up with Duncan McInnes from MTP Connect before we close the session. Could I please ask that you use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions, and you can upvote questions by clicking on the like button underneath the question, and we'll only be able to answer the most upvoted ones because we tend to get a lot of questions and only an hour's time. So if you need any help, we've got the chat function. Our team are there to help you out. So enough of me, let's get started. We might start with a quick intro from each of the panelists, including their role in digital health. We might start off with you, Jill.
Thanks, Trika. Morning, everybody. My name is Jill Frame, and as Trika said, I'm the Deputy Research Director of the Australian eHealth Research Centre, which is part of CSIRO's Health and Biosecurity business. We've been around for about 15 years working in research across data, diagnostics and services. My background and my passion is around health services and virtual care, so taking mobile, tele and online health into the hands of patients and clinicians across the world.
Thank you. Perhaps, Bron, you can go next. You're next on my screen.
Hi guys, Bron Legrice, founder and CEO of Ant Health, which is Australia's only dedicated digital health accelerator, but we specifically focus on scale-ups and by providing deep industry immersion and advice. Prior to that, I was a venture capitalist, so 7 years in venture capital, roughly $100 million of deals, of which half was in digital health companies. So a little bit of experience at the coalface and quite a lot of experience with our nascent industry here in Australia.
Thank you. And Zoran?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zoran Bolovic. I'm the Chief Executive of eHealth New South Wales and Chief Information Officer for New South Wales Health. What that means is I lead a specialised agency within New South Wales Health, Australia's largest public health system. The agency is specialised in all facets of ICT and digital health, from planning and strategizing and investing in key projects and programs in our system to program and project managing many of those implementations. And then we also, in partnership with a vast array of industry partners, support and run many of the systems that are enabling New South Wales Health to be a great health system. My passion is to improve and enhance health systems so that they deliver fantastic outcomes for patients and citizens.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Narmika. Good morning, everybody. I'm formerly with the Therapeutic Goods Administration. I spent 10 years there, and I was responsible for bringing the software regulations into play. They're meant to be enacted later this year. Could possibly be a delay based on what's happened in Europe, but there haven't been any announcements yet. Currently, I'm at the University of Canberra, and a very exciting role leading a startup there for some spin-off technology that will eventually be a digital health solution. So I'm pretty excited. And we've just finished the CSIRO on Accelerate program. So, and
fantastic.
Great experience. So thanks.
You're all from different parts of the puzzle, so it's going to be a great conversation. We're going to kick off with a question to Bron. Let's start by defining digital health, and where do you draw the line between digital health and well-being? And what sort of frameworks do you use to evaluate these sorts of digital health products or services?
That's like 5 questions, Dharmika.
I know. But yeah.
So I think look, digital health has been a term that's used quite broadly, and I think as the industry evolves, and it is a nascent industry and it is an emerging industry in most jurisdictions, we're getting greater and greater understanding of the breadth of digital health. So, I mean, I think if you go back 15, 20 years, there was a very big push around e-health and digitalisation of medical records and enabling the delivery of healthcare systems and services via technology and improving efficiency. I think now we also see, if you think about it being concentric rings, digital health, including telehealth and electronic medical records, but then moving into, and we see a lot of companies in digital medicine and digital therapeutics, where the clinical and commercial evidence thresholds and the regulatory thresholds become much higher. So these are technologies which leverage digital technology, sometimes hardware and software, but they make clinical grade claims, and therefore they need to meet the same kinds of thresholds as any other medical device or therapeutic. And they are looking at products which actually prevent, treat, manage, mitigate disease. So we've got lots of proven examples of that globally, and we're seeing some really cool companies come through here in Australia. But it's not, I guess, not to offend anyone, but it's not just about telehealth, and it's not just about getting our medical records in a digitally movable form. It's actually about how we improve the lives of Australians using digital technology that has clinical evidence behind it.
Thank you.
There was a second part about how we
the frameworks that you use to evaluate these sorts of...
So I mean, we've done a lot of work mapping the commercialisation pathway for digital health. It's not quite as simple as a medical device or a pharmaceutical development pathway, in terms of, if you're producing a medical device, you go through your feasibility trials and then into your pivotal clinical trials, and you can expect certain valuation uplifts at those points. Similar in a pharma development pathway, once you get to phase 2A, phase 2B, phase 3, you can start to see very good supported valuation comparators in the market. In digital health, that evidence building phase can be 5 to 8 years long, and it is likely to not just incorporate clinical evidence, but also commercial evidence, healthcare utilisation studies. So people need to be using your product in order for you to get the data that you need to fully start to realise the value in your technology, which is quite different to a medical device, where a lot of that early IP development is done around clinical trial work. In digital health, you need a lot more commercial work done at the same time, and it can take some time to get that data. When we look at case studies, those companies that did pursue those pathways and get those regulatory approvals early have then had to go back to market and do the healthcare utilisation studies they need to get large-scale customer uptake. So it is a slightly different commercialisation pathway. It's also an evolving pathway, and as Elizabeth can talk to, the regulatory landscape is evolving in different jurisdictions at different paces. So if you are going global, you may have to consider different models and different approval pathways in different jurisdictions.
Gotcha. So Zoran, what are the challenges of bringing digital health products to market, but in particular, translating that into clinical practice in a public health system?
Well, I guess in my position, I'm on the kind of other side of that whole kind of pathway to market. You know, I run an agency that consumes lots of digital products and attempts to implement them in a meaningful way in a large health organization. But we are also finding increasingly that there is a role for organizations like ours to stimulate innovation and assist market players in bringing new ideas and new products to the market, and we'll probably pick that up later in the conversation. I think from my perspective, with any kind of a digital health product, and my definition of that is quite broad, is that really, first of all, they need to be solving some real problem. You know, they need to be adding value to patients, to clinicians, to health systems, to decision makers, whatever domain you're looking at within a large complex system. The second area is that they do obviously need, in some way, to be able to interact and interoperate with other systems. It's, you know, we're talking about digital health as if it's something new, and we just kind of stumbled upon IT in health yesterday, but it's actually not true. Health has been an early adopter of all things ICT and has been implementing gradually IT technologies over 3 decades or so. So there are lots and lots of bits and pieces that you will find in any large health organization that are already there. And so when you come with a new product these days, these issues of exchanging information, interoperating, systems talking to one another are becoming really quite important. The third area is safety. The systems do need to be safe, especially if they are providing or purporting to provide advice to patients, or purporting to provide advice to clinicians upon which they rely for clinical decisions they will make. So safety, and there are all sorts of different aspects of safety that usually go with disciplines like human-centered design these days, and so on. And then last but not least, and this is probably more in the context of a larger health organization like the one I am part of, scalability is very important to us, and performance. So once you have some of these products become embraced and being used more broadly, once they become part of, let's say, some important clinical process, performance becomes really, really important. You know, you come into that kind of space where they almost must not fail. And so therefore performance and scale, certainly in my environment, are very important. That's not universally the case for all types of digital products. I'm just sort of sharing my perspective.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Zoran. Elizabeth, I might throw to you on regulation, because that's quite a hot topic in this space. It's a very grey area. How does it differ from traditional devices and diagnostics? And then I guess also, what should founders be thinking about when they're trying to regulate a digital health solution?
Thanks, Dharmika. I think there's a lot of misconception about the regulation of digital products. And I think it stems in large part from the fact that people are entering this medical device market from non-medical device backgrounds. And so they don't have that understanding coming in, and that causes a lot of confusion. You know, CSIRO did a research piece for us when we were developing the new cybersecurity guidance and the software regulations, and that was one of their findings, that it's that lack of understanding of the whole regulated space that causes a lot of that confusion, I guess. So in fact, they're regulated the same way as traditional medical devices. So you have to, first of all, figure out if your product is a medical device. And Bronwyn alluded to this when she was saying that it has to be for a certain purpose. So if it fits that definition, and if it's intended to diagnose, treat, monitor, alleviate disease, illness, injury, or if it's for consumption, contraception, or modifying the anatomy. It's a device and it's regulated. So that is step one. Then you have to classify the product. So you classify it according to its potential to cause harm. Now, this was ignored in the early models of medical device regulation. So the rules for software classification don't consider that the information they provide can cause harm. Those rules only considered physical harm through the interaction of a physical device with a human. And so as a result, most software products that are being developed and have been over the past decade fall into class 1, the lowest risk category, even though they may be providing diagnostics for serious diseases. So this is the change that's coming in the reforms. We've reformed those rules so that software is appropriately classified. And what's important there is that there's higher regulatory scrutiny once you have a higher risk product. So that means you're going to have third-party oversight of your development processes and of your evidence before you can supply it, which is the same for traditional devices. So at the moment, most software products have a much easier ride through the regulatory process, even though people don't quite realize that. I think one of the other factors is the lack of a reimbursement pathway for many of these products. And people often confuse regulation with reimbursement. So I think that's part of, again, the confusion around why is regulation so difficult.
And how about, maybe this is to all of you, how do you deal with different regulations and perspectives on privacy, personal identifiable information when you're building these sorts of things, especially in different jurisdictions, I guess? Anybody like to go?
Look, I think if you're going into any market, you need to be aware of the specific requirements around personal health data in those jurisdictions, and you need to work out how you're going to build your stack to accommodate that. And whether that's you buy it versus build it via, whether Microsoft Azure or AWS or any of the other platforms. But some of those have turnkey solutions around how you segregate and manage your data. But the biggest thing we see a lot of companies come to us that don't have current data collection policies. They haven't necessarily considered how many people that they're dealing with who are not in Australian jurisdictions, that don't have necessarily, they haven't thought about GDPR or HIPAA compliance. So I think you just need to be really conscious of where you're operating, and that's not just around data privacy, but to Elizabeth's point, same thing with regulation and same thing with reimbursement. You may have a different model in different jurisdictions, but you cannot enter another market and be unaware of that, because it's the fastest way to get shut down. But I also think there's plenty of information, there's plenty of companies out there that have facilities that you can leverage to achieve those outcomes. And to Zoran's point, interoperability is key. Mm-hmm. So if you're not compliant with that jurisdiction's privacy requirements, you won't be able to interoperate with existing systems within that jurisdiction, because your customers will do due diligence on you and you will be found wanting. So there's a certain part of me that says security and privacy and knowing what you're doing in that space should be basic hygiene practices for a digital health company. This is people's health data. We know that they feel intensely more personal ownership of their health data than they do other types of data, including their financial data. Mm-hmm. And you need to treat that with respect, because they are part of your user base.
Gotcha.
Could I just add to that? I think on a positive side, what we are observing is that over the years, there has been considerable convergence and harmonization of privacy legislation across Australian jurisdictions. So you will actually find that most of the principles are very similar between all states and territories. There'll be some, idiosyncrasies, that different states will have. But by and large, the principles are the same. And there has been a high degree of interaction between states and territories in that regard. And I think the federal government has played a very useful part in driving that harmonization, and I think they continue to do that. So I feel personally that there probably aren't too many barriers for innovators, digital product developers in terms of, if you want, spreading their offerings across Australia. I think internationally, jumping internationally is a completely different kettle of fish. I would agree with Bronwyn. There would be possibly significant differences between countries.
Thank you. Jill, often in digital health, there's a question mark around the need to do clinical trials. And so do you have a general, rule of thumb around this, or what sort of options are available to people so that they don't have unbiased cohorts when they're training up their solutions, I guess?
I think the question, thanks, Darmica, and apologies for her. When the purpose of a trial is multifactored, and it goes back to Bronwyn's comment earlier about, well, at what stage are you at? What are you testing and trialing? And what is the purpose of that? And how do you build it? So certainly from a regulatory perspective, there's a firm line on what you need to prove around safety and efficacy around a particular product. And I'll let Elizabeth comment on when that's relevant. From our perspective, from a research perspective, you would want to have that product in the hands of some test users in the very early days. You want to refine it, be that a UI, a human-computer interaction refinement, looking at the processes. You should ideally be building it with the end users. Really understanding how they work and fitting your product to their flow, or challenging them to change their flow because of different things that can be done with technology. Then as you grow, you'd want to look at the value of your product. And so that's more about benefit realization. So that can be done in a siloed manner of, here's my product and here are the patients or clinicians that are going to use it. And I'm going to analyze what happens in that system. So the interactions, how does it change workflow? How has it changed the time spent with patients, the quality of the service, all of those components. But then the real proof, and if we are looking to change policy and change funding mechanisms, is really in a much larger scale benefits realization trial. And that's probably not for an individual company to take on. That's for us as an ecosystem to say, we want to look at pharmaceutical changes, PBS, MBS data, hospitalizations, usage of a healthcare system, really what are the knock-on effects from a particular product or service or system and into the health system as a whole. What challenges has it thrown up? What challenges has it solved? And how do we continue to improve it and make it better? So I guess the purpose of the trial depends on what stage you are at in your commercialization or your prototyping of a product. Or where you are at with the regulatory, but it is an ongoing solution. And if we're not allowed to put health claims on a packet of cornflakes, we certainly shouldn't be allowed to put health claims on a software product without the appropriate evidence behind that. And so larger scales. Going back to your comment about the cohorts, some of that depends on who is already using your system and again, so it depends on the kind of trial you're running. There are many organizations that will take on a trial for you and run it, be that a national or international trial. I guess very much like the pharmaceutical industry. CSIRO, we want to run our own trials and we also design protocols for others. And so I guess within this medtech space, a strong research protocol that really understands what you're trying to prove, that gets you the right cohort, that can power it correctly so that it stands up to the scrutiny from the regulators and your competitors and others. That's a really strong purpose of having that foundational piece. Thrown together clinical trial will not get you what you want because it will be shot down as soon as it's published, or it may never get published.
Thanks, Jill. We might start to shift towards some of the questions that are coming through on the virtual floor now. So I'm going to start with some of the top voted ones. We've got one from Carolyn Mee. She said, as it was noted that digital health tech needs to be cash flow positive before it attracts investment. How do the panel envisage startups being funded, particularly with the increased burden of requiring third-party oversight? Who'd like to take that one? Bronwyn's got her hand up.
So I would fundamentally dispute the fact that a digital health company of clinical grade needs to be cash flow positive in order to attract investment. I think that will depend on the type of investor you are going with. I think if you're looking at an investor that has a predominantly generalist technology software portfolio, then they will require cash flow positive or at least some revenues. I think if you were going for a more traditional healthcare investor, they are very comfortable investing in companies that may have no revenue for the entire life of their investment. But in order to get that type of investment, you need to be able to point to a robust comparable valuation when at exit. So I think you don't necessarily have to be cash flow positive. I think, and I'm going to mention that dreaded word COVID, I think everybody needs to be aware that in a post-COVID environment, especially in Australia, there is going to be an extreme shortage of capital, not least because the government's policy that people can draw down $20,000 from superannuation funds who have no liquidity requirements will put the big institutions that fund a lot of our VC firms right up against the wall and overweight in their alternative asset portfolios. So I think in terms of being cash flow positive, I don't think it's true. I think you need to find the right investors. And I think the risk of going to market with a product making health claims without the necessary clinical trial evidence and without the necessary regulatory approval is, so one, there's a risk that you're making health claims and you will be pulled up by a regulator. And the second piece is that you risk going to market. If you try to circumnavigate regulation and that kind of evidence pool, you actually risk going to market with something that you can't then establish a defensible competitive strategy around, because if you go through a non-regulated path, then everybody else can too. So you've got to assume that you can beat companies from elsewhere in the world with bigger, deeper pockets and access to bigger capital pools. So I think you need to have a clear milestone what those value inflection points are, and you need to be really clear about your research and clinical trial protocol, but also your health economics protocols that you're going to put around it in order to really capture investment. But investment will be tough post-COVID.
Gotcha.
Just all the stats show that investment will be tough. The VCs will be looking after their portfolios as much as they can, especially those in healthcare who've had to suspend clinical trials. So the access to capital will be tough. VCs with money to spend will have it to spend, but they'll be really cautious about how they spend it.
Thanks, Bron. Anybody else want to add to that one?
Well, maybe just a few quick thoughts from my perspective is that I think there are lots of problems to solve in health that don't involve necessarily going into those more as I think Elizabeth said, areas that have a high risk profile, that have these sort of health claims. A lot of what health is about is processes, and lots and lots and lots of processes in health. Many are quite convoluted and are not making it easy for our patients to navigate the system and make the right decisions for themselves. And there's a plethora of opportunities in these spaces. Health systems themselves are complex. There are lots of problems to solve within them. And similarly, clinicians are always hungry for new insights, new ways of looking at data, and new ways in which their work can be augmented and enhanced. So there are lots of areas that will not necessarily get innovators, going down that hard regulatory road. So that would be my first thought. The second one is exploring different pathways. So, for instance, in New South Wales Health, we have a long-standing translational research grant scheme that has been quite successful. Is governed by our Office of Health and Medical Research. And what I'm noticing in recent years that an increasing number of these applications, whether they are all successful or not is another matter, but an increasing number of submissions have some theme that is to do with digital or IT or digital augmentation or data analytics. So we are seeing that as one pathway for people to develop new stuff, usually in conjunction with research teams in one of our health organizations. And then finally, there are always opportunities to do proofs of concept. If an idea you've got is dealing with a particularly important problem. And we do feel that there is a role for organizations like ours in creating an environment that could stimulate people coming up with great ideas that solve real problems, and then trialing them and testing them in different ways, which would of course then require some funding to be invested by agencies like ours. So there are a number of different pathways. I'm not an expert in VC. I think Bronwyn is right that probably access to venture capital will be harder. But there is also this desire, I think, by all levels of government to create some economic stimulus, and for Australian economy to become smarter and go more into advanced manufacturing. And it seems to me that digital health fits somewhere in that narrative. I don't think we've yet built a strong case for it, but it seems to me that digital health fits well into that narrative, and we should be working together, industry and government organizations, to see how we can build a stronger case so those stimulus packages do at least a little bit drip into the digital health space. I think we'd be all better off for that.
Thanks, Soren. I guess a lot of the questions coming through are very COVID related. So I'm going to drop to another one, which is about the adoption by public and private health. That's from Natasha. So from what she's seen in health generally, it's been quite resistant to change. And if there is a change, what evidence is there, other than new reimbursement codes, that potential customers are adopting technology?
I think there's been over 4.5 million consults in the first 6 weeks of the telehealth codes being released. So I think whether there's no data to date on the quality of those interactions, but certainly there have been many interactions. And so I think there's certainly funding around at the moment to actually look at those and to see what they have released and what they have unlocked within both the clinician side of things and the patients in terms of the quality and the comfort levels with those transactions. And so there's obviously some face-to-face still happening, but we have seen a massive shift to that. I guess time will tell how long that shift lasts for, what that shift starts to open up in terms of new conversations and bringing that forward. Many of us have been waiting for the release of those codes for many years, and so to unlock some aspects of it. So now we've got companies who will thrive, hopefully, under those new reimbursement codes, but they should also be growing. What's next? How do we take that forward? And how do we move from video and audio, which is just the same as normal, just with technology, into something that's actually more revolutionary and that will actually change things? So I think we've seen uptake, and time will tell what that uptake actually translates to.
I think, to Elizabeth's point, it really shows what reimbursement does to trigger uptake of a technology, and clearly the environment has just torn down some natural kind of barriers to adoption for clinicians and patients. Jill, I got some updated data yesterday. So 10 million consultations, 5.6 million patients, and $526 million reimbursed on telehealth. The disappointing thing is 60% of that has been on phone call consultations. So it would have been better to see, I think, from my view, a bit more use of better and higher quality platforms like video. But I do think it would be a real shame if we stop at telehealth and we don't then go on to looking at what a truly connected healthcare system looks like, and enabling empowered patients to take care of their health in the home and to access care as and when they need it. If for no other reason, because of the massive protection of the vulnerable and the increase in access to care provides people who can't necessarily access clinics.
Yeah, it will make us more robust if virtual was the norm to things like bushfires and other natural disasters, as well as the pandemic. Because people are avoiding the physical GP, and if they're also avoiding the technology, then they're not being serviced. And so we need this to be the norm, so that flipping to a digital discussion is not something that people avoid.
I think it's worth mentioning too that it hasn't been limited to telehealth. Although not as large of an uptake, there are instances of remote patient monitoring, which is increasing. So that's with connected medical devices in the home, and with data being monitored almost like a virtual intensive care unit. And that's slowly happening here in Australia, but there has been a bit more of an uptake for that sort of service in the US so far.
Yeah, and we've started scale the trials and pilots that we've got ongoing as a COVID response. Our gestational diabetes trial has gone from 2 hospitals to half a dozen, to try and keep pregnant ladies away from the hospital in the current environment. So we're seeing great demand for remote monitoring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo these comments. We're certainly seeing in our environment many examples now of not just video consultations, but also remote monitoring, and different models are being used for that, with varying degrees of success and again, ease of interoperability, but it's moving in the right direction. And certainly COVID has been, as terrible as it has been, in many ways has been a leverage point really for a significant takeoff in virtual care. So it's not just reimbursement, because we are seeing this shift also in the acute hospital environment where the reimbursement hasn't really changed, but we embraced virtual care significantly because we had to. And it was building on foundations of already existing and gradually growing trend. So it's, again, the trend was already there. The COVID has just amplified it. And I would say manifold. Like in our environment, we've seen an 18-fold increase in the use of video conferencing in the space of 3 or 4 weeks. It's unprecedented.
Yeah, totally. I guess while we're on the topic of reimbursement and COVID, we've got another question from Peter, which is about home monitoring products. So how is COVID changing the international trends in their usage and the provision of government and private insurer reimbursement? Do the panel believe any trends will stick post-COVID? Perhaps Elizabeth, you might want to start us on this one.
So I know already in the United States, payers are announcing that they're going to keep the COVID measures in place permanently. Not all of them, they're just beginning to make these sorts of announcements. I expect once the data is analyzed to show the scale of efficiencies, that we will also follow that trend here in Australia, although we're unsure at this point.
Sure. Anybody else want to add to that one?
I think the US codes around remote patient monitoring that were brought in over the past 3 years have really shown a drive, and that there's some really good data from Validic around the uptake of use of remote patient monitoring attached to those codes. That definitely drove the connected device kind of piece in the US, that direct reimbursement codes. Just noting, guys, we're not talking about reimbursing the devices. We're talking about the doctors being reimbursed to review the data that is generated by the devices. So they don't have to do it in their own time. It's like a paid piece of time as it would be for a consultation. So, and there's different degrees of reimbursement depending on the seriousness of what's being monitored and the detail and all those types of things. So the US codes are really interesting. I think what we'll see here is I think the telehealth codes will be continued, and then that's when we start the dialogue about going beyond that. Noting that a lot of this, and Elizabeth will know better than me, possibly requires legislative change. So the wheels of legislative change in Parliament don't move easily, and are often influenced by election cycles and press. So I think, you know, where these regulations are embedded in law and need changes through acts of Parliament, change will be slow. It's just, you know, and we can, the best will in the world, I don't think it'll be immediate here. On the private health question, though, it really depends. It depends on the focus of private health. You know, it's a highly competitive industry. It's under extraordinary amounts of pressure. You know, they are using a lot of wellness-focused activities to attract new customers and things like that. I haven't seen a significant shift to the using of clinical-grade remote monitoring yet in private health, but again, it may be a issue. I mean, if you look at one of the most successful connected in-home patient devices, which is the ResMed CPAP devices, they're not reimbursed purchase. In Australia, ResMed's built that entire franchise in a non-reimbursed scenario, based on just the sheer desire of people to, as Mick Farrell would say, not suffocate in their sleep. But, you know, that's a non-reimbursed model and they've done that. But you do wonder how many people can't afford that device that should have it.
Sure.
Can I just a very quick comment, if I may, Damika, on this? Is my observation is that in relation to home monitoring or remote monitoring in the context of the COVID response, most of the models we've seen have actually not been out of primary healthcare. So it's not, the reimbursement is not a barrier here because it's not been primary healthcare based. There is one in our environment, one region that has done it as a joint approach between local health district and primary health network, which I think is the best model, doing it as a shared care model. But most of the others have just run it out of the hospital system. And they have a very clear benefit out of that. Obviously, clinical safety for staff, for patients, but also avoiding avoidable hospital admissions and avoidable unnecessary emergency department attendances, because it's a great outcome for patients. It's a great outcome for the system. So the rationale is there. You know, you don't need to come up with some special reimbursement model, because the rationale already exists there. It will, but the point is well made. It will be interesting to see how those models can then translate more into primary healthcare for chronic disease management, for instance.
Thanks, Soren. We've got a quick, let's move to the future, because some people are asking questions about the future. So you get your glass ball out. What do you think the future of digital health innovation is in Australia? And what are some of the trends that you think we'll be seeing in the next 5 to 10 years? And I guess we can all have a crack at this one if you like. And maybe we'll start with Jill.
Look, something I guess that we're seeing and excited about is, and it's standard, so it's not sexy, but it is real, and that is the excitement around fire. And so, you know, we've seen the Australian industry and government and other agencies really start to embrace fire as an openness, a way of unlocking the potential of data, of freeing up data, and for everyone to innovate. So rather than it being a kind of a vendor cluster, that it really opens up innovation. We hope that trend continues. Zoran mentioned a proof of concept earlier with New South Wales Health, and we had one this year where we used fire in our city and to look at predictive analytics and risk stratification, and it was a really great experience for us to take fire, to implement it, and to look at those standards, and to partner with industry to take one of our algorithms forward. And so it's a great way of interacting, and it really levels the playing field, and we're hoping that continues, and that it provides a foundation and a plumbing for more innovation.
Thank you. How about you, Elizabeth? Got any future vision?
Well, I think it's the democratization of data is going to drive healthcare to a more consumer-centric model. So people will have better access to manage their own healthcare. And a lot of procedures that currently rely on invasive techniques will be able to be replaced by better sensors, better non-invasive sensors to provide that information. And therefore, the need to go to a hospital or a healthcare provider to have this information drawn out of the body won't be there. Of course, that has a whole can of worms that have to be unraveled in terms of education of consumers, the perverse incentive for healthcare providers to want to continue with their invasive procedures because that's how they make money, versus the digital solution. And again, that goes back to the reimbursement, the need for those techniques to be reimbursed so that they're not competing priorities for healthcare providers. And I think the education is so important for all sectors of the environment.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Zoran, did you want to have a go at that one too? What's the future, especially from the health system perspective?
Well, in a way, linking what both Jill and Elizabeth said, I think virtual care is going to be really significant in the coming years. And we already talked about that and the reasons for that. And I think it will require, to be successful, this kind of transformation towards more virtual care will require both the customer centricity and making that customer experience and the ability of the consumer to be more engaged with the providers through digital channels and have ease of access in other ways other than physical or traditional ones, I think is going to be the key. But it will also require that really clever, sophisticated kind of integration underpinning with great standards like FHIR and others, really enabling that interoperability and movement, safe, secure movement of information across different tiers of healthcare. So more virtual, more patients, consumer-centric, with great integration underneath, which will also, I think, then enable us to really move more confidently into real-time data analytics and more sophisticated data analytics in health, because we are still probably not maximizing the use of huge amounts of data that is collected in health on a daily basis now. So I think data analytics in health also has a bright future in coming years.
Thank you, Zoran and Bronwyn.
So I mean, I'm gonna be out there. I would like to see in 10 years digital health right up there alongside our medical devices and pharmaceutical sectors as a extraordinarily strong, internationally competitive, export-driven economy. That, you know, an industry that is creating high-quality STEM jobs, that's fostering advanced manufacturing of sensors and wearables here in Australia, that also delivers health system resilience and healthier Australians. So, I mean, I think we have the potential here to leverage our top 5 position in health and medical research into being an absolute powerhouse in digital health, inbound clinical trials from offshore companies and export-ready companies. We've worked with 300 companies at Ant Health in less than 3 years. We know what the pipeline looks like. There's plenty of potential in there. There's lots of challenges, but one of the best ways we can create a healthier Australia is to support our local innovation and build those into global companies that are headquartered here in Australia and really lead from the way. And you know, Zoran's point about interoperability, the infrastructure created by the My Health Record, the data analytics capability being developed by the DHCRC, the clinical capability that eHealth Research Centre has been developing, and we do quite a lot of work with CSIRO, and the really innovative companies that are coming through. They offer us an opportunity to build a world-class industry, and that will be key to post-COVID economic growth. So I'd like to see digital health up there in Scientific American and Australia as a top 5 destination for digital health research, the same way as we have been for medtech and pharma research.
And what skills do you think on the back of that, and capacity do we have, but what are we needing to build, or what are we missing?
Oh, ouch. I was just going to finish on a big high then. Look, I think we have great STEM graduates coming through. We've seen 165 jobs created across our 10 cohort companies. And those jobs are everything from clinical roles in terms of interfacing with technology through to biomedical engineers and UX and design people. I do think digital health offers opportunities for more social science-backed disciplines, such as consumer behaviour. You know, a lot of the technologies we see are deeply about changing patient behaviour and engagement and design, to Zoran's point earlier. And so those art/social science disciplines are really important to bring into the quite technically focused STEM stuff when you're developing these products. So I think it's a broader cross-section of skills than maybe we would have seen in a pharmaceutical industry. Mm-hmm. But I definitely think that we have the university power to deliver those, and I think we've got the right framework in terms of the quality of our research to drive this, and also we have a world-class healthcare system. So, you know, some disruption to things like reimbursement codes, which help companies build business models, which help them attract investment, which helps them do more trials. You know, they are all kind of factors that feed into a flywheel effect. But I think those skills, they're STEM skills, but there's also a whole bunch of skills around design and consumer behaviour and psychology and those types of things that really need to be brought into the fore as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm really conscious of time, and we really powered through that, and it's gone very quickly. So I'm going to hand over to Duncan McInnes from MTP Connect for some reflections and some final thoughts, and I might ask you another sneaky question if I get a chance, but we'll see how we go. Hey, Duncan.
Thanks, Dharmika. So first of all, I want to say that I'm delighted that MTP Connect is able to support Cicada and the broader MTP sector through this monthly buzz event. It's a fantastic panel that you've managed to put together, and it's been a really fantastic conversation too. Dharmika was the first person I met with when I started in my role at MTP Connect in January this year, and I'm really glad that we've been able to bring something together. A few things around MTP Connect. Dharmika introduced us as the Industry Growth Centre for MedTech, Pharma and Biotech. We are also the Industry Growth Centre for Digital Health and have a long history of supporting companies in the space, including Ant Health. We have a new report coming out. There were a few questions about how COVID-19 is going to impact digital health going forward. MTP Connect has a report coming out in the next month on the impact of COVID-19 across the broader sector and how we can respond and recover, and how the MTP sector can play a leading role in that. We also have a white paper coming out on adaptive regulation in digital health that Bronwyn and the Ant Health team have been very closely involved in. I think there are a few very clear messages that came through, and the first one I think was probably one that Bronwyn made very elegantly in her recent Innovation Oz article. It was that digital health is more than just telehealth, and I think that that's a really strong message that needs to be pushed. Another interesting conversation was around regulation, and I think Elizabeth made a really good point when she said that there's a lot of misconception around it, and it mostly comes from a lack of understanding. I would say that the other flip side of that, which the lack of understanding of regulation probably comes from people coming from a tech background moving into health. And maybe the flip side of that is a lack of understanding around the importance of privacy and security from people moving the other way. Zoran also made a really interesting point, and I mean, we see a lot of applications at MTP Connect for people saying we're doing a digital health thing. Zoran's point that you need to solve a problem is a fantastic point. You need to solve a problem, but not just that. If you want to build a successful business, you need to have someone willing to pay you for solving that problem. And that sort of leads into the conversation around reimbursement as well. I'm going to finish off with some of the interesting thoughts around the future and Jill's thoughts about how standards will play a role. I think if there's something that we've seen from the US that wasn't done well, it's standards around particularly electronic medical records. Elizabeth made a really interesting point about the democratization of healthcare, patients owning their own data, and I think that's going to drive things going forward. Zoran pointed out that virtual care is going to come to the fore in the next couple of years, and no doubt accelerated by what we've seen over the last couple of months with the COVID-19 issue. And finally, Bronwyn finished on a really great point and a great vision of Australia becoming a world leader in digital health, and I think we'd all like to see that happen.
Thank you very much, Duncan. And I'm going to squeeze in the really quick question, so quick answer on the most exciting digital health product you've seen in the past year and what it is. Somebody kick us off. Who would like to do it?
I'm going to opt out of that question because I see me and my team have seen 300, and I don't think I can pick a winner out of those 300. But I do think I'd like to point out a couple of really successful commercialisation stories. One being DoseMe, who were unable to raise money here and became an integral part of the tabula rasa stable of therapeutic management system software in the US as acquired by a NASDAQ listed company, started in Brisbane. Perks Health, who are using extrinsic rewards to motivate low health literacy patient populations to engage with their medication and be much more adherent, amazing company. And Sear Medical, who have shifted a extremely difficult process of sitting in a hospital room for 7 days to be diagnosed with epilepsy, and they've shifted that virtually. These companies are, that company is now 100 staff, and they are utterly changing the way that people can be diagnosed with epilepsy and making it accessible to people who may have never been able to get their condition actually diagnosed to go into a treatment regime. And there's many more. I mean, we talk about our cohort companies. We just released our cohort company impacts yesterday from the March quarter. Those cohort companies have gone on and they've impressed us at every turn, the way they have pivoted their businesses to find business models. But picking one when we're seeing 30 companies a quarter, it's just too hard.
Sure. Has anybody else had one that they've seen that's been very impactful and they've remembered very well?
No one wants to pick.
Okay, fine, no pick. It's just been, you know, something that you think's been really, really impactful. That's fine. We're pretty much.
One thing I will point out, I'm going to do a bit of a Cyro pat right now, is that it was really good to see CardiHab, which is a Cyro technology, starting to really come into its own in COVID-19 through its remote rehab for cardiac patients as well. So I think we're really starting to see the impact some of these companies can have, especially when people can't go to clinics. And so, you know, some of these companies are continuing to serve patients in a way that if they were reliant on going into a clinic, they can't be served. And that's a really important time, especially during a period of isolation, and especially in a future where these rolling periods of isolation might become a regular thing.
I'd like to call out, it's not a product, it's more a service. I've been really impressed with how a number of our hospitals have, in a very, very flexible and rapid way, implemented these remote monitoring services for patients with COVID. And, you know, they are starting to publish their results, and they are really quite impressive. And it hasn't been so much about the tech. It's actually been about people and processes and good care, enhanced and augmented by technology. And I think that's part of the magic of being involved with a wonderful industry such as health. It's about people first and foremost.
Can I just add to that? I think, yeah, what's been exciting for me is to see that shift in attitude that COVID has brought. You know, it's a silver lining from a pretty terrible situation, and I think it's been really good.
Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, that about does it for time, and I'm sure we could keep going for much longer. I'd like to thank our panelists for their insights and also their time today. I hope it's been invaluable for those of you that did tune in. It was for me. I'd also like to thank our event partner again, MTP Connect, for their support of the event, and of course, everyone who attended today. We're really thankful that you joined us for the conversation. Before you leave, and while we're on the topic of digital health, Cicada Innovations in New South Wales Health will be supporting the And Health Planet Innovation Bright program, which is a 3-day workshop designed for digital health companies that have a proof of concept and are seeking the skills and insights to really commercialize that. We'll be running that one from June 15th to 17th. So if you're interested, I encourage you to apply via our website. You can also sign up to our newsletter to stay in touch with everything that we're doing from here on in, future events, and we have quite a few in the medtech space, so please do take a look. And there will be a survey post this. We ask you to please fill that out so that we can continue to improve these events. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for your time, and have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.